Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Helga is the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is October 30th, 2024. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. You can send your questions and comments for Helga via email to questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them on the chat page. Well, Helga, last week was an extremely eventful week. Three of the most significant events were the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia, the Sare Vega symposium concert on the 26th in New York City, and the brunch the next day hosted by Scott Ritter on the threat of nuclear war. At the two events in New York City, you were a participant and provided a clear alternative to the wars of the oligarchy, in which you spoke of replacing geopolitics with a new strategic and development architecture. So our first question is, can you elaborate on what you mean when you say we must reject geopolitics, and give your assessment of the BRICS summit? Did it represent positive motion toward overcoming geopolitics?
Well, yes, the Kazan meeting offers a new system of relations among nations, basically based on the five principles of peaceful coexistence, namely to respect the sovereignty of every country, of non-interference in the internal affairs, and accepting the different social systems. So I think that five principles of peaceful coexistence is the basis for the BRICS conference. And that is naturally also embedded in the UN Charter. And if the West would stick to the UN Charter, they would have no problem in, just associating themselves with it. What stands in the way is the remnant of geopolitics, which comes from the time of empire. Especially the British Empire is very notorious that they always like to manipulate the states, the allying with the weaker state against the stronger state, or causing some kind of a map which would give room for manipulation of borders and ethnic conflicts. And then naturally this idea of geopolitics was emphatically reiterated in the Wolfowitz doctrine at the end of the Cold War, whereby the neocons basically said, that there must be a unipolar world dominated by the United States, and that no group or no country, no nation or group of nations should ever be permitted to bypass the United States in terms of economic, political, or military power. Now, that is obviously what was unfortunately the basis of the foreign policy in the immediate period after the Cold War, which led to color revolution, to regime change, to interventionist wars, by basically trying to keep that kind of an unipolar world and make sure that no other government would oppose that. Now, this is now too short to go into all the policies which went along with it, but it led to an enormous blowback, because the idea that you can export the liberal model of democracy, what Francis Fukuyama called the end of history, which basically meant that you would import or export the neoliberal economic model, the liberal cultural model, export the Western conception of democracy, human rights into all of these countries around the globe, led to a gigantic blowback. And now what we see since quite some time is a realignment of nations who do not like to be changed. There's people say we have our own culture, our own tradition, and we want to stick to that. So this is why you have now a relatively loose association of states who are not forming a bloc, and they are very emphatic in saying that they are not competing with NATO or the EU in terms of bloc building, but basically they say they are open for everybody to join, including NATO members. So this would be a perfect opportunity to say, let's just put this confrontation that you always need an enemy, and that either a country is with you or against you, and you are either friend or foe. Let's put that scheme of black and white aside and just recognize that it's good. It's a good thing that the world is made up of so many nations and cultures and traditions. And let's find an MO through common development that we can all live peacefully on this one planet, which happens to be the only one we have so far. You know, pending future space exploration, but this planet is the only one we have to live on for the time being. So let's make peace, and let's have an order which allows that to occur. Now that is the overwhelming intention. I mean, at the Kazan BRICS meeting, there were already 22 members, I think nine full members and 13 becoming members, but being already accepted as members, and then a whole long line of countries who are hoping to become a member in the future. So already in Kazan, there were 4.7 billion people represented, and with it 57% of the world population. Now that's clearly the global majority already right there. And these countries are now proceeding to try to build a new economic system which will overcome poverty and underdevelopment of all of them. And they, while not yet going fully the way to have a new reserve currency, because they want to be careful and not repeat the mistakes of the euro, but they are creating new institutions. They have already created the new development bank, which is supposed to become the great bank of the global south. Then Putin suggested a investment platform for the BRICS, a grain platform for the BRICS. So things are moving very, very rapidly. And, I think the West is still having a very difficult time. Not everybody, because people who know about it, ordinary people, so to speak, they are quite happy and are welcoming this development. But some of the establishments, they have a very hard time of recognizing this new majority, that it's organized, that it's growing. Because, if they would take a positive attitude, they would have to throw overboard all of their existing assumptions and axioms about the world. And obviously, they're not intellectually flexible enough to do that. So they're still refusing to relate in any positive way to this new BRICS combination. But there are more and more voices now, who speak out. Like, for example, naturally Hungary, Slovakia, the new government in Georgia, but also the grandson of Charles de Gaulle, Pierre de Gaulle, asked that France should, under no circumstances, miss the opportunity to join the BRICS. Actually, he said there are forces saying things like that in Italy, in Germany. So I think, it is now a period of great transformation. And I can only say, people should really study this and not condemn it just because the mainstream media is having a negative attitude. I think it's really a chance for humanity to avoid the disaster of going into a nuclear war, which would end all life on the planet, if we in time can join this new situation. So I think it's a very optimistic and very, very joyful event.
You're listening to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, and we can take your questions. Send them via email to questions@schillerinstitute.org. Now, Helga, prior to the BRICS summit, there was an agreement reached between India and China to resolve their border dispute, which had been a long-standing issue. So I have a question for you from a correspondent in Pakistan who asked, given the role of the Anglo-Americans in provoking confrontation, do you think this agreement can succeed in achieving better relations between India and China? And what does this mean for Pakistan?
Well, I'm pretty sure that it will succeed because, it's clear that, India was the most contested nation of the BRICS from the standpoint of that, the so-called democracies wanted to pull India as the supposed largest democracy in the world into the camp of the Democrats. I mean, there has been a tremendous effort from the United States, from Great Britain, from Scholz. Scholz went there with 4 ministers on Friday, immediately following the Kazan meeting, trying to pull India into the Western camp by offering military equipment to reduce the, quote, dependency from Russia and all of that. So they have not given up on trying to pull India in the other direction. And I think that, Modi is, there are a lot of things one can say about his domestic policy, but I think on the strategic outlook, he wants to keep the independence of India in the tradition of Indian, policies going back, way back. So I think that is an important thing. And I think for Xi Jinping, it is also a very high priority. I mean, remember that Xi Jinping went to India many years ago, 10 years ago or so. And he made a speech in New Delhi, which I read at the time in detail. And I was really impressed that Xi Jinping has an in-depth knowledge about Indian history. And, he emphasized the important high points in Indian history and culture. So I think, from that side, there is a great openness as well. And what that means for, I think that they will stick to it. I think they know what is the opposite, the obstacle. They know who is trying to oppose it, and they are smart politicians. What it means for Pakistan, well, I know that it probably was India why Pakistan was not invited to the BRICS summit, if I'm not mistaken. And, obviously there are still lots of tensions, but I'm quite optimistic that the whole idea of the Belt and Road Initiative or local connectivity will basically, grow into all of Asia, all of Eurasia. That will connect the Asian countries with the European countries through development corridors along the, the old Silk Road, along other corridors which are newly built. So I'm quite optimistic, that the CPEC corridor, which is one of the showcases of the whole Belt and Road Initiative, will be connected to all of these other projects, and that eventually, through joint economic development, these tensions will outgrow themselves. Now, I think that also obviously will have some important implications for the domestic policy in Pakistan, which I think needs also some improvement in terms of what is happening with Imran Khan. So I think the overall perspective, I think the momentum is clearly on the side of the BRICS. And therefore, I think hopefully the tensions between Pakistan and India can also be eliminated in that context, in the common interest of all.
Now, on Saturday, there was a conference and a symposium and a concert sponsored by the independent candidacies of Diane, Sare for U.S. Senate and Jose Vega, titled Build a Peace Chorus Against the Ghouls of War. We have a question from one of the participants there who said the musical presentations were especially moving. But she asks, I'm not sure I fully understand how culture can play a role in overcoming geopolitics.
That's a good question. Well, I think it's important to understand that both from the humanist side, what I mean by humanist is, I know this word in English means has a slightly different connotation than we use the word in Europe. what I mean by humanism is the Italian Renaissance, the German classical period, people like Beethoven, Schiller, Humboldt. For them, the idea of music and culture in general, but music in particular, is having a direct effect on the emotions. And the reason why we and they emphasize so much classical music, of which the spiritual in the United States is a part of, is because it speaks directly to the heart, to the mind, but through the heart, and it elevates people. It makes people think and feel more ennobled and more sophisticated, more elaborated, more degrees of freedom in your emotional development. And that's very important to the development of the character and the mind. This is why, for example, many great scientists, including Albert Einstein, would, before they would start to work on a mathematical or a physical problem, would play the violin or some other musical instrument, because it puts yourself in a creative mindset. Now, if you look at what the opposite does, that's the Roman Empire. They use the circus, the gladiators fighting each other, or Christians being thrown to the lion. In that tradition, the empires always used entertainment to lower the moral and intellectual level of the people, because they think that if people are as bestial as possible, it's easier to control them, because if they have unelevated emotions, you can get them to either, if they should agree to kill the Christians or the gladiator, then they should pull down their thumb. If they let them live, they should put the thumb up. And that way involving them actually in a bestial mindset. And if you look at some of the so-called popular music, and I know I'm stepping on many people's toes when I'm saying that, but if you look at some of the pop music, from Gothic, to various other forms of rap, and where a bestial image of man is being put forward, or meaningless violence, or just the lowest part of the human character. You increase aggression, and you can actually get people through specific rhythms. You can actually get them pretty aggressive, and that you see in certain types of football and soccer games. And anyway, you get the gist of what I mean. So if you want to elevate people and say that we should not regard other nations as enemies, but we should relate to the best tradition of the other, well, then you would try to find the most beautiful folk songs or the best classical composition. Not every music has the kind of polyphonic composition like Western classical music. But you can find, even in simple folk melodies, you can find incredible degrees of beauty, and you would relate to that. So it is, obviously, you will not end an ongoing war by playing a classical concert, but you transform the people listening to classical music into a more noble mindset, and then they're also receptive for more noble ideas. So that's why I think it was a real breakthrough and a joy to use this mixture of political speeches, classical music, chorus music, soloists, to basically have that effect. And some people have never been exposed to classical music, and they have a difficult time to relate to it. But I think, only very few hardened minds are not able to eventually get it.
And people can see the video of the event last Saturday. It's posted at the schillerinstitute.com, and it's over 3 hours, but I recommend watching it, sharing it. It was really quite an extraordinary event with some very well-known speakers such as Scott Ritter, Jimmy Dore, Garland Nixon, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, and of course Helga was there. Now, on this question of elevating the human spirit and the whole question of brotherhood, there's several emails from people who are angry about the continuing murderous attacks by the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza, in Lebanon, and elsewhere. And we have, for example, Jim Hogue writes, "What's the point of trying to persuade psychopaths?" And he called for a massive armed invasion of peacekeepers to protect aid workers in Gaza. Another wrote that she's losing hope and asked, why won't the Arab nations or Russia threaten to strike Israel?
Well, I think it is unspeakable what is happening, and the latest development of Israel to ban the Palestinian aid organization UNRWA is, just if you imagine what is going on. I mean, now there are no more journalists because they have all been killed or driven away. No more aid workers, no more medical help, no doctors. And the few reports coming from Gaza are so unbelievable. What is happening there, basically, it is ethnic cleansing, and, that mankind is not capable so far to deal with that is incredible. But I think there is a lot in motion. The South African government just delivered new material, 5,000 pages of documentation to the International Court of Justice, asking for immediate action. And I can only say that the non-action of some governments will be a stain on them for probably ever. And the fact that there are still some governments sending weapons to Israel with everything which is going on, I can only hope that we can mobilize some alternative. And I have said it last time, that even if it looks extremely unlikely, with the military strikes between Israel and Iran, the ongoing horror show in Lebanon, the genocide in Gaza, I can only hope that we can succeed to push this idea of new international security and development architecture on the international arena, and then have the OASIS economic development plan for Southwest Asia as a part of that, and really try to change the dynamic. On the one side, naturally, you cannot rest for 1 minute because of what's the situation. But I'm also a little bit hopeful, because the changes occurring are right now extremely rapidly. I think the Ukraine situation is coming to a decisive point of change, hopefully for the better. The situation in the US election, we have in 6 days a new president, one would think, or in any case, a change in the situation, and we have the Kazan results. So I can only say we have to keep mobilizing as much as we can to put the solutions on the table, which is an economic development plan for the entire region. Because if you don't have a approach which helps every country in the situation, I don't think a solution is going to be possible. So I know this is not what some people would like to hear, but I think it is, if it would be an easy problem, it would have been solved already. And I can only say that the hope for economic development in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative is probably the only way how we will come to peace and hopefully ending the massacre.
Okay, I have a correction to make from what I said earlier. The event is posted at the sareforsenate.com. That's SARE for Senate.com. That's where you can see the event from last Saturday. On commenting on the cultural question, Diana Shaler from Canada writes, "There's not much culture in the West today. Unfortunately, all we hear and see is the Hollywood entertainment." She said, "Thankfully, with the advent of the internet, we can now access real culture." So thanks for that, Diana. Now, here's a question that came in from a couple of people, Helga. What's the status of Saudi Arabia? Is Saudi Arabia part of the BRICS or not?
Not formally. I think they are still sitting sort of on the fence. I can only imagine that they are being pressured a lot from Great Britain and the United States not to join the BRICS. I think that they are, basically, given the history of Saudi Arabia with Great Britain, with the United States, I'm not totally sure what the internal dynamic is of Saudi Arabia, but as of now, I think they are sitting on the fence, and one can only assume that they will go with the tide eventually.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Here's a question from someone who's referring to events from Sunday. There was an election in Georgia, and the Georgia Dream Party, which is considered a pro-Moscow party, won the election, the parliamentary election. And immediately the European Union and NATO expressed their discontent, their unhappiness. And this person is writing, and do you think there will be an attempt at a Maidan coup in Georgia? And if so, what would Putin do?
Well, I think it's very, very interesting, because what becomes very clear is that if a pro-NATO country wins anywhere, it's a victory of democracy. And if the opponent win, then it is vote fraud and it has to be opposed. I mean, it's becoming so apparent. The Dream Party had 54%. I think the pro-European Union party had 39%. So it's an overwhelming victory. But that did not prevent the president, who's obviously pro-EU and pro-West. She is actually a pupil of Zbigniew Brzezinski. She studied at Columbia University. She was a French ambassador at one point. She has a French nationality. So in my view, she's one of these typical examples, where certain pro-Western politicians have been put in positions in the former Soviet republics, and then they are, very loud in demanding, to join freedom and the West and so forth, but not representing the actual will of the people. Now, the fact is that the Georgian population, remember that there was a war in Georgia in 2008, where Russia did intervene in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And, this was a very dangerous moment for Georgia. This was, I think it was the result of the effort to pull Georgia into NATO, which was promised at the NATO summit in Bucharest in 2008. And a lot of trouble, for Ukraine resulted out of that totally reckless promise that Ukraine could join NATO. And, when basically that led then to the Russian intervention in Georgia, this stopped it for Georgia at the time being. And, obviously Georgia is in a very difficult situation, because it has to be, they're not anti-West, they're making the Dream Party is saying they want to be part of the European Union or part of the West, but they also want to have good relationship to Russia. And isn't that a reasonable position? I mean, what do you think? Why is Mexico not joining the BRICS? Because they are at the border of the United States. And there is a saying in Mexico that they only have one problem, and that is geographical and historical, obviously what this refers to. So Georgia is in a comparable situation. And is it not wiser to say that they want to have a good relationship to both, like Slovakia, like Hungary? And so I think this whole idea, what the EU is doing, Ursula von der Leyen basically, calling out this election and so it's just is exactly the kind of geopolitical thinking I was talking about before, and it is not good for the Georgian people. And sure, they are trying Maidan right now. There is no question about it. Hopefully, it can be calmed down. And I don't think Putin would allow Georgia to go in the direction of what was attempted in Ukraine, because it's a vital security interest of Russia not to have offensive weapon systems at the border, which can reach deep into the territory of Russia. That's a red line. And I think, would the United States accept Cuban or Chinese or Russian offensive systems at the border of Canada, US, or Mexico, US? Obviously not. So there should be an equal principle for all. And therefore, I can only hope that this effort to repeat the Maidan can be diffused.
And the Georgia border with Russia is almost 600 miles. On this question of Mexico, the other saying about Mexico is Mexico is too far from God, too close to the United States. Now, Helga, I have a couple more questions for you. One is from Germany. There are reports of growing tension within the governing coalition of the Free Democrats, the Greens, and the Social Democrats, as their votes have been collapsing in the last three state elections. So the question that comes in is, what would you propose to replace the failed and unpopular Scholz coalition government?
Well, the coalition is really not functioning. They have managed to ruin Germany to a degree. Scholz, yesterday, there were two economic summits. One was called by Scholz with the CEOs of the auto industry, and then another one called by Finance Minister Lindner with the middle-level industries and startups. And the two had nothing to do with each other. So it was like the chancellor and the finance minister basically trying to, pose themselves against each other for future election results. But obviously, they have two completely different concepts. None of them works. We have a huge crisis in Germany right now where VW has announced that they want to close down 3 factories, basically laying off tens of thousands of workers. And the region of Wolfsburg, which has a lot of these plants and suppliers, is basically about to be completely shut down and ruined. This is a major national crisis. And, there are now several spokesmen from the FDP, but also Lindner himself, who basically say, it could very well be that the coalition does not outlive this fall. And Lindner said this is a fall of decision. So it could very well be, if they do not manage to get an agreement among the 3 coalition partners on the budget for 25, I think the government will fall, and it could fall before Christmas. Now, on the replacement, that's not so easy because, unfortunately, the present chancellor candidate of the CDU-CSU, Friedrich Merz, has profiled himself as being one of the most hawkish pro-war persons. He's demanding that the Taurus missile should be delivered to Ukraine, which I don't understand how you can, in your right mind, say this when even a top-level Ukrainian commander just came out yesterday and said, that the whole front is collapsing, that it's a lack of ammunition, it's a lack of soldiers, They don't have resupplies. The soldiers are on the front are super tired because they have been fighting for years. And basically, he admitted that the thing is not functioning and coming to an end. So in this situation, to call for an escalation means, anybody who is willing to do that is just saying, let's butcher some more Ukrainians in a war which has a geostrategic aim for NATO, but which obviously is fought on the back of the Ukrainian population and is killing more people. So therefore the opposition in Germany right now, at least the traditional opposition, is not creating any change, not at all. Now, concerning the other new parties, the AfD and the BSW, the Wagenknecht party, they could gain a lot more votes in a new election. I'm pretty sure they would. And I think there is right now an extremely interesting battleground in Thüringen, in Brandenburg, where the BSW negotiated with the SPD some, preparatory paper for entering negotiations for a coalition. They could find an agreement on the key demand of the Wagenknecht party, which says on foreign policy, no more weapons to Ukraine and no to the installation of US medium-range missiles from 26 on. And they found some agreement which is still watered down, but it's agreeable to both sides. In Thüringen, the local chairwoman of the BSW capitulated much more to the CDU by, just having a very wishy-washy statement, which caused Wagenknecht to attack this very sharply. And there is now a huge poll within the BSW where most people say we did not go into this fight to just become a party like all the others, where it doesn't make a difference what you say because the policy remains the same. So I think that is very interesting, but all of that will mean that the polarization in Germany will increase. And if there's early elections, I'm pretty sure that these opposition parties will gain a lot more votes because, people are really scared about the world. It's not just Ukraine and Southwest Asia. People really think that we are in a terrible crisis, and they are looking for people whom they can trust. And I think that the previously governing parties have lost the confidence of the population to a very large degree already. So it will be difficult because, the government formation, when you have so many parties trying to do that, is very difficult. So I can only say what we will try to do. We will try to tell people, no matter what party you belong to, you should, basically organize that Europe, Germany, but also other European nations are relating in a positive way to the BRICS, and that we should convince even the United States to do likewise, because that is the only way how I can see that we get out of this crisis.
And the final question also is about elections. By the time we speak again next week, the U.S. election will presumably be over. We have two comments. One is from Fred, who says the corruption of the present political parties shows that without free elections, the will of the people will never be heard. Having been in the United States the last couple of weeks and watching the ads on television, it's all negative, attack ads and so on. So the question comes from a New York supporter. Given the choices we have, what do you recommend we should do?
I don't know. The impression one gets from the level of the discussion, where the candidates just attack each other and as you say, negative to the hilt. makes it very difficult. I think the only thing I could full-heartedly suggest is that you absolutely help in the remaining days, especially if you are from New York, to get as many votes for Diane, Sare, and Jose Vega. And the rest, I don't want to make any suggestions whatsoever, because maybe with Trump the Ukraine war would end early, but I'm not so optimistic what his Mideast policy would be. So I don't want to really suggest anything in that respect. I think we are in a epochal change. I have said many times the period of 500 years of world order where the so-called West dominated the colonial countries is coming to an end. I think there is no way how we will return to, the kind of system which was, based on colonialism and imperialism. And now the big question is, can we in the West get some kind of a renaissance going back to our best values? And, I think the only people who represent that were the people collected at the concert on Saturday, which I think was a formidable combination of people. And I could not tell who else would have been able to pull that kind of a combination together, from the Eisenhower media people to the VIPs, Veterans for Sanity in Intelligence, to Diane and Jose Vega and the musicians and so forth. And I think, no matter what happens in terms of the presidential election, I think that, I would vote for somebody who is anti-war. And whoever is not for anti-war should not be voted for. But I think that will not resolve the problem, because I think we will go into more transformation. I think we will not get the world safe until we get to the new security and development architecture I've been talking about now for almost 2.5 years, or almost 3 years. And since there are many countries, including what comes from Xi Jinping, what comes from Putin, from the BRICS, I mean Putin's offer for a Eurasian security order, security architecture, and recent proposals by China proposing a global security architecture, which in formulations comes very close to what we have been discussing. So I think we have to think in that terms and not be hung up on the election as such. The only thing I can endorse full-heartedly is Diane and Jose.
Well, this is certainly an exciting period and a fascinating period of time. And I think one of the things Jose has said is pretty much parallel to what you're saying. Jose said, vote for yourself. Make yourself a significant factor in shaping of the election. And I think that's one of the best pieces of advice I've heard. So Helga, thanks for joining us again today. And I assume we'll have an International Peace Coalition call on Friday again.
Yes, and obviously it will be important because a lot is happening in changes in Ukraine, in Southwest Asia. So make sure you are on that call.
Okay, so I'll see you on Saturday then, or Friday. Excuse me, Friday.
Friday. Till then.